Great to see you. Of
Yeah, you too, Kyle. Thanks for having me.
course. So one thing that's interesting about your background to me is that you've managed channels like email and SMS for a long time at some great companies. And one thing that's always kind of just fascinated me with email in particular is the staying power that it's had over the years. And so I'm kind of curious, like, as someone that's in this channel frequently and messaging to a really broad group, like, why do you think it's been so relevant for so long?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, it started as the only kind of electronic communication, but there has been plenty of more enhancements and it still sticks around. I think the biggest reason is probably that it is used as an identifier and a login and really how people are accessing a lot of the online platforms or services that they're using. And you're seeing a shift to mobile where it's hey, you can sign up with mobile or email, but really for the past 30 plus years, if you wanted to sign up for an account online or do anything online or register, it almost always required an email address. And then that was the preferred way of communication for the businesses. I think the personal use of email is certainly cut down, right? I still get some evites and things like that, but most of my communications with friends and family are through text message or a group chat or something like that, where email, I still look at it as very much my communications with businesses or services that I use. And the nice thing with the promo tabs in Gmail and things like that is it helps you filter it out. I do think that the fact that it's required and almost every single person has one, and it's at this point where it's less personal. It's very much like a mailbox where if you get junk mail or get something like that, it's just part of the process. But there's still some relevance in the way you can filter it out. You can really kind of make sure that the emails that you are receiving stick around and are actually relevant to what you have.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned the tagging that Gmail does. I'm sure I don't have like Yahoo or whatever other personal email address anyone would use, but because it's kind of filtering out these emails, my personal inbox is an absolute disaster. So I'm like super grateful for that feature. But have conversion rates dropped over the years, or like how has that, like, what are the benchmarks now?
Yeah, it's a great question. The conversion rate hasn't necessarily stopped. I guess it depends on what you're looking at. If you're looking at those who actually click through an email or those who kind of from the send side of things. And from the send side of things, it certainly has dropped a bit, but it mostly has just moved to different channels where we're seeing that if someone opts into SMS, there is actually an uplift both on the email side and the SMS side for that individual. But a lot of the revenue coming from the email will actually be attributed to the SMS going forward, where the email is still a reminder, and then the text message, ideally, it's actionable and personalized and hyper targeted. And at that point, you're getting the conversion on the text message, where the email is almost more of a billboard or a banner or a quick reminder.
Hmm, interesting. I assume SMS is like much more effective than email. Like, what are the conversion rates there?
Yeah, it is. We see I think I see about a 20 to 30% spike between SMS and email. It is. I mean, part of that is because they're expressly opting into to SMS, and it's a much more restricted channel in terms of what customers can send, what companies can send, what communications, when we can send them, and it's really really easy to opt out. And so the advice is if you're only sending promos or events or sales through SMS, you're going to hit a cap at some point because it is just another channel to announce sales or things like that where you could get that elsewhere. If you start doing things that are very helpful to have through the text message, even simple as order confirmation, shipping updates, anytime there's a major need or concern. But that's why, so you'll see, like I was actually just doing some research on this where if you're just sending promos and that's the only thing you have to offer through SMS, you might get around 50% of your customer base to opt in if you go really aggressive on the SMS side. If you start doing things like reminders, auto ship notification, shipping confirmations, it starts to get to around 70 or excuse me, 60%. But if you start doing appointment reminders and reminders that are very, very hyper relevant, those end up having around 70% opt-in rate across your whole audience. And so it really can't just be a promo engine. It has to be a communication engine more than anything else of what's the most important thing that we're trying to talk to this person and what's the right channel. And oftentimes if they're opted into SMS, they're showing a strong preference to just have that quick text message as long as it's not interrupting. And so we really try to make sure that our promo SMS is like 10 to 15% of the actual communications we're sending out through that channel because we value the opt-in so much, right? We don't it's more important to get someone to we don't want people stopping or unsubscribing to the text messages because there's a ton of relevant information. We know it works well, and what we need to communicate, that's the fastest way. So we really protect that very, very closely to make sure that if we'll send out, it's kind of similar. We'll send out the emails and promos, and that is far less guarded. But when you're talking about someone's text message in their inbox, they get far more frustrated if it's irrelevant, bad timing, or too frequent, and that's really what we have to guard against.
Yeah, it's like you've earned the right to send those SMS messages, and losing that is really hard for a brand, right? I personally like I really don't like SMS comms, especially promos. Appointment reminders and things like that are actually insanely helpful. So like that falls into a completely different category in my opinion. But that's great that you balance the promos and like helpful reminders and things well. So yeah. Interesting. What are you kind of live at the intersection of like, there's the data that you have and then the ways to access the customers, right? So like managing those channels. And one thing that we were, when we were prepping for this, you said something that I thought was very interesting. And that was the ability to like have AI show its work when you're working on extracting data and segments and things like that. I would love to know like how are you using AI today to like to activate some of these customers?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of what we're using AI for now is for our own process and enhancements where, hey, let's use AI to cut down the build time of our emails from a couple hours to a couple minutes, right? And then free up our developers to focus on some other things that are really urgent and kind of important. But a lot of the showing your work thing was really exciting for me because there is that level of trust that you're skeptical of all times. And so one recent example I used is I was working on SMS projections for 2026 to 2029, right? And that's very, very heavily assumption based. And it's not, I can go in there and I would spend, the day figuring out the Excel formulas and reminding myself and brushing off those old skill sets. Instead, what I did was I put in all the assumptions into ChatGPT. I added, and then I said, hey, create a model. And it came back and it spit out an Excel doc that was just all value based and there were no kind of formulas and it was just here you go. And so from there I said, hey, can you actually, instead of just giving me an Excel doc with information, can you just build one that has the formulas and so I can adjust the assumptions and plug it in? And at that point, it built out the Excel doc where it had one tab with just the assumptions and the rest was built out in the model. So I could go through with each kind of section and look at how it's running that calculation through the Excel formula. I could adjust it if I felt like there was something off. But then really all I had to do was go in for the assumptions. Once I said, okay, I feel comfortable with how it's set up, I went through and I started adjusting the assumptions and kind of had a best case scenario, worst case scenario, and most likely scenario. And it took something that probably would have taken me a full day, if not two. And I was able to get it done in maybe 2 hours and feel pretty good about it.
Nice. That's great.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing that I've noticed, I was never good at Excel. I use Google Sheets at my current company, but the I recently started using Gemini to like fill in formulas, and that was like wow, like the democratization of Excel knowledge is wild. Like that is giving everyone the ability to kind of be a data analyst. The only issue is like I don't know how to check that work within Gemini. Have you figured that out?
Yeah, I mean, it's a process like it's very similar to having a conversation with an intern asking them to show their work, where they might get flustered a bit and but it is kind of breaking it down. And one way I've seen success with it is having them break it down into steps and say, okay, you did this. Now, what were the X number or 5 or 6 steps that you took? And then they'll break down those steps. And then I'll say kind of, okay, in the first one, let's look at that kind of math of that logic and let's make sure it makes sense. But to your point, if I don't have the ability to QA, if I can't understand the Excel formula by just looking at it and reading it on my own, I, I don't know if I can then have Gemini convince me that it's the right thing to do. And that kind of leads into allowing the experts to leverage AI for their benefit instead of having it replace the experts, because if you want a data analysis done through ChatGPT or through Gemini or through any AI, the best person to be able to prompt the GPT and then check its work and actually have the back and forth of and use the right keywords in technical conversations would be a data scientist or a data analyst. Just as it would be if you're trying to code a website, the best person to prompt GPT is going to be a developer that can have those high level conversations and doesn't just have to be kind of really dumbed down. And then they also can really drill in much more technically and not have to avoid bad assumptions or incorrect inputs because of bad language or misunderstanding a certain keyword.
Yeah. So based on what you said, it seems like there will be less total democratization of being a data analyst, more just the empowerment of existing data scientists that are looking to get information faster or better. Is that right?
Yeah, I can see it going in one of two ways, where you kind of maintain and have the data scientists run it. The other way is you allow the data scientists to build out the GPT and build out the kind of that model that you're using to allow others to use it, right? Have them validate exactly what it's doing, have them kind of run logs and make the updates and kind of look at the prompts and things like that, but then allow the rest of the team to go ahead and use that. But it's very important to have someone who knows what they're talking about in that realm be at least able to monitor and validate it. Because if you get rid of the entire analytics team and you just put it into ChatGPT, it might work. I mean, it very well could if your data set's solid and really simple and really accurate. But if you're dealing with messy data like a lot of people are, that's where you really need that expert to be able to validate.
I forget what firm it was, but did you see there was a press release that they had to refund money to a client because they basically just had like a bunch of chat GPT data in there and it was like incorrect. Like that's
Yeah, and I've seen
terrible.
something like that. I've also seen, I forget what airline it was, but they had an AI agent through ticket pricing, and they were able to convince the AI agent to sell the ticket for $5 or $10. The airline legally had to validate and honor that purchase.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's putting the guardrails in place is the hard part. And we're going to get better at it over time. It's still such an early technology, especially for enterprises. My theory is that, AI will greatly benefit like smaller organizations that have less like, you know, processes in place and are kind of rethinking things all the time because they're forced to. And then as the enterprise starts to adopt AI and more processes, it's just a classic like the smaller companies gonna be able to move faster than a large organization.
But yeah, the ability to be agile with it and scale like a startup. And it is almost eliminated barriers to entry, right? Where if you used to, at least if you wanted to build something on the tech side, you would need to know how to code. And at that point, you don't. I mean, I have plenty of friends who have no computer science experience and they're now vibe coding with Claude or ChatGPT and building out like just small apps that help them themselves out throughout the day. Like, this helped me monitor my medication or help me monitor my food intake. And they're just doing that to learn it. But that was never possible until what, 2 years ago? Not even.
Not even for vibe coding. I mean, like I was a developer a while ago. I was a terrible one, but I still was a developer. And there's that moment where you vibe code for the first time and you produce that app and you're like, this is unbelievable. Like it's like picking up an iPhone in 2007, you know?
Yeah, it is. And when I think about how early we are in the AI stage, I'm trying to figure out if we're at, like, if I'm looking back at the dot com and kind of the internet kind of adoption, I don't know if we're at the dial up phase of this. I don't know if we're still in like just universities using it on their own. I don't know if we now have, like, it's so early that it's really, really interesting to see where it's going to go from here, because there's a lot of opportunity and it's just trying to figure out where the next big thing is going to be.
Yeah. I mean, we're clearly, I personally think we're in the dial up phase of this. It's like the infrastructure is being laid as we speak, and we're all kind of adopting it at the same rate. The difference is like the internet took a while to take hold for the public, but because of our adoption of digital earlier on, like we all adopted it at once, right? Like it's this crazy thing. And now organizations are saying like you have to use this, otherwise like your job's on the line, right? And it's just like it's mandated. So that's pretty incredible.
It is. And I tend to agree with you that we're in the dial up phase. And then if you think about technology kind of growing exponentially, it's going to be so much faster for the AI adoption. One, because one of the issues with .com was not just getting the infrastructure and people online and the slow rollout there, but it was also just the trust, right? Of I don't really know if I'm willing to buy something online and have it shipped to me. There was a mindset that had to actually kind of change for the public. And I think now that we've kind of been in this internet phase for the last 20, 30 years, that lack of trust isn't there when it maybe should be in some cases, or at least some skepticism. But everyone seems to be, okay, I understand. I understand this. I understand the data privacy concerns. I understand what it's doing. And there's there's more willingness to trust it right off the boat because of everything else we've experienced in the past.
No. I mean, if we're in the dial-up phase and there's just all this capital being thrown around, there's some really interesting financial engineering happening. Like, I personally can't help but think that we are in the first AI bubble. Like, it's hard to. I think there's going to be many bubbles with AI specifically, just because it really is going to be the most exciting thing to talk about in technology forever. It's like for 50 years. Like, I have no idea. It just, I don't know it seems like each year within technology, there was an exciting thing to be talking about. Uh, and I think AI, like in 2016 with machine learning, was like, that was like a big thing, right? That
Yeah.
was what every company talked about. And then we went down a really unfortunate like metaverse rabbit hole and and NFTs like that. That was like 2018, right? And so it's just like we go through these phases and trends, but I don't think this one's going away anytime soon. And that doesn't mean there isn't going to be a bubble that pops, right? Like I equate it to like the .com crash. It's like we continue to use the internet, it continued to accelerate, but just the amount of capital basically propping up the US economy right now is insane. So I'm kind of curious, like 1 to 10, like what do you think the AI bubble, like where are we at?
I mean, we're definitely in a bubble. I think we're probably, to give you a number, probably at a 6 or a 7 out of 10 with 10 being the most likely to pop or pop the soonest. The reason why I don't have it higher is I am curious about, is there a kind of limitation on the supply side of the computer chips and the GPUs and the technology that's actually the hardware that's powering these AI? And is that going to continue to be kind of a way to slow things down and take things a little bit more incrementally, where it's kind of artificially increasing the demand by reducing the amount of supply? I also very much wonder, are the GPUs going to be what is kind of primarily using with AI? And is it going to be quantum computers, quantum mechanics? Is that going to be the next step of what's powering this? And so while there's definitely going to be consolidation, right? Right now, there seems to be an AI for everything, right? We have an AI for creating videos. We have an AI for audio. We have an AI for analysts. And then you have a couple of the chat GPTs and Claudes that are kind of trying to be an AI for all. And so if it ends up being an AI for all, then it's very much going to be a massive bubble, and it's going to get widely consolidated into 2, 3, 4 major players. But if we see the trend of kind of having those be kind of the power system behind and have these smaller AI bots and smaller AI agents doing other things, you're going to see some consolidation, but there's always going to be a need and demand for it. And I think, kind of to your point of the .com bubble, it was because there was a slower adoption and people, okay, now everyone has it in another home, but they really weren't using it for commerce yet. And that was the expectation. And it took a while to adopt. I think that adoption is going to be so much smaller, where you're going to see a bubble, but it's going to recover very, very quickly. That's my own personal opinion.
Yeah. No, I mean that's a great take. The Since we're like at the dial up time, uh, the infrastructure is actually quite important. And it seems like we're investing a lot of capital in these data centers, and whether they're built on GPUs or quantum, that's like a big open question. And there could definitely be a chance a situation in which like we invest a lot in GPUs and it's just quantum dominates the whole thing. And then maybe an emerging market, picks up quantum and then leapfrogs everyone, right? It's like these things are certainly possible.
Absolutely, and I think the more advanced our AI gets and the better it gets, the more likely those things are to happen, right? Right, if we're in the dial-up phase now and we say we're in broadband, it's probably gonna be the ability where AI can start designing better chips for them to use and get more it's gonna be that at that point where it's feeding itself on that model, and so at that point, to speculate where AI is gonna be in 10 years is not a fool's errand, but it's hard to do, and that's why I tend to listen to the experts who are in it every single day. They're pretty good at saying what we can do now and what we're trying to do later, and I just trying to focus on what we can do now.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, I mean, have you ever read Life 3.0?
No, I haven't, but now that you
Oh, it's a
recommend it,
great
I'm gonna have to pull it up.
it's a great book. It was probably written 2019 or something like that. So like um before, Gen AI really came out. And it talks about how there's three different like phases of human life, and we're entering like this third phase where we introduce general artificial intelligence. Like what's not to say that this type of intelligence, ends up manipulating matter in a way that we don't understand, that leads to like all these repercussions that we have no control over. And it's just this, and there's already been like these purpose manipulation from AI at this point to get around some systems to keep surviving. It's just all terrifying.
Yeah, it is, and it's moving so fast, and there's gonna be some regulation, but that typically doesn't happen until there's a massive backlash or massive push for it, and I don't see the public pushing too hard for it at the
How
moment.
could you, but like how? How do you regulate something that we don't even really understand how it works under the hood? It's like governments, anyone trying to put a regulation in place would just do a terrible job of it, right? So it's like,
Yeah, it goes back to the iRobot 3 rule thing, right? Where the AI can eventually convince itself of a workaround of those. But you're absolutely right. It is. But if they have no regulation, then you can have bad actors coming in and intentionally building things like that and using it to their advantage. Where I think the regulation comes in of how you're using AI, what it's able to prompt, what it's able to look at, what it's able to use as training material, and then who's able to interact with it. Right? There is going to be things like that where it's going to be on the companies and not the AI, which is it's weird to think about of finding an AI agent, but it's it's going to happen at some point.
yeah. I mean, do you ever envision yourself like using an AI agent personally? Like you seem pretty advanced with AI, like you're definitely using it professionally a lot. But in terms of like, are you trusting something to buy something on your behalf, even, a couple years from now?
Marginally. I'm not not without my review. I'll trust them to consolidate and then show me options. Like it would be a so one example we actually where we moved into a new home, everything it came fully furnished, which was really nice, but also really annoying to remodel and redesign. And we were trying to find a rug, and I took a picture of our floor and the living room, and I put it into I think I used Gemini this time, and I said, "What are some rugs that would look really nice on this?" And of course, it made their own rugs and designed rugs that didn't actually exist. We gave it some feedback. It came up with three or four more, and then there was one we really liked, and we just did a reverse Google image search, and it came out to look very similar to a rug that was at Target for like $70. And so not only did we find a rug that we wanted, we found one that was really cheap, and it was done in 30 minutes with four or five prompts. And kind of looking back at it, you're like, well, how does it? You kind of look at the rug we got and the rug that Gemini built, and it's very much an inspiration. And so that's the nice thing is they're building everything off of a previous model or previous, they're building one rug out of 1,000 million rugs. But as you go down, it's pretty easy to use that and then find something that's close enough. We'll use it for that. I'll use it to like for dumb arguments, right? Those are, fun things in terms of like improving my day-to-day life by having like a personal assistant through AI. It'd be great. Not yet. So I can see myself at some point, but in the next 5 years, probably not.
Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of talk about like agentic commerce specifically, and that consumers are going to adopt agents that do exactly what you just said. the thing is like that technology's kind of existed for a while. Like this like reverse lookup, like take a photo of something on Google and then it shows you something that is likely to be it. Like that's been around. I'm not sure it's people really knew about it, and it's not as like widely adopted for sure. But one of the things that I personally have seen when I try to shop with ChatGPT and specifically, well, I guess AI and then ChatGPT is like my preference is like there's just a ton of dead links, and I'm not exactly sure why, and it does really like make me lose trust in that process where I'm like, all right, I have everything curated and then I click a link and it's like that product doesn't exist. That link doesn't exist. I'm like, okay, this is actually really frustrating because now how do I get back to where I need to go? Like I need to find this exact thing. And I don't know. And then you end up going to a browser anyway. And so I don't know. It's a
I've ex-
very disjointed experience at this point.
I've experienced that, and I ended up getting so frustrated where I just said, okay, build me a Google query, a search query that will get me to this website, and it did it, and it still didn't work. Like it was, I think if I went to like one of the, like the cached, one of the legacy websites where stores historical, I bet you it existed at some point in time. But that is the downside of having kind of all of the data in the world. You don't know what's relevant, what's not anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I just think about that from like a mass adoption perspective where you're building queries into Google to try to get, it's just like, it's not going to work.
No, and I also, and this is where my cynicism comes in of, okay, you start doing, you know, consumer AI agents, at some point they're going to start selling ads, and you're going to have sponsored responses and sponsored comments, and it's going to turn into like, what is it, the Truman Show, but with an AI agent, where
Right.
you're trying to have a conversation about, breakfast, and they don't forget your nice Ovaltine, and that's where I'm getting curious of, because it's going to be a bubble. There are going to be companies that have this, and they're getting a lot of startup capital, and they're getting a lot of seed funding. And then when they have to turn and go from, seed to turning a profit, they're all still in the e-commerce age. It's going to be, let's put ads.
I mean, AI plus ad it just kind of defeats the whole purpose, right? I think you're right though. It's inevitable. Like it's great that companies have been able to figure out and to add enough value into someone's life to be able to just charge them $20 a month or whatever for pro or whatever. And like, as someone that is an absolute power user of AI, like I am willing to throw money at these companies so they can continue to provide like better and better service. But yeah, there's probably just gonna be like that free tier where, there's all these ads and you lose trust in it, right? That's the biggest problem. It's just like, okay, now this is a biased opinion, and before everything was unbiased, and it's like, how do you maintain that trust within that paradigm?
Yeah, I agree. But you also have paid sponsorships and influencers, and everyone knows that they're being paid on behalf of the companies, but it still seems to be a very relevant marketing channel and a very relevant way to drive demand. And so it's depends if people start becoming fanatics of AI. And then at that point, I don't think people will question it at all, which is unfortunate. But you're right. It's in a free tier where it's paid ads, and then it's not gonna be $20. I can almost guarantee that, because of the amount the amount of infrastructure they're gonna need to power it. Yeah, I think you start to wonder, well, is it democratized for all if it gets to that point?
Yeah, I mean, Sam Altman has explicitly said, like, I would love to get this in the hands of everyone so the world can have access to it. And I can't help but think that that's just like, I mean, it's a great story, and that's something that you can pretend like this is the best thing for the world, but really it's like a data play, right? Like, what's in it for them? It's we're gonna get all of the data possible and get you on this operating system, and then we're gonna do whatever comes next.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm with you. Exactly right. Where I get really excited, and the the opposite of where I'm skeptic, is when it's used for things that we've historically had massive issues with, like patient medical records, or actually being able to control your own healthcare and have all of that information available, or be able to quickly ask questions and get information based off your medical history, right? There's a ton of privacy concerns and all the HIP and everything. But those thoughts are being put in place, and some really smart companies and startups are really starting to think about that, and how they leverage that. And that's where I get really excited of, how do we have better healthcare, better results, better alerts, better infrastructure, through these kind of small startups that are really trying to make a big difference. That's where I get really excited.
Yeah, I mean the personalized medicine I think is like that's such a massive opportunity. Even as like a consumer, I've definitely had like just better healthcare experiences just with AI, right? You could say like, you know, I hurt this one thing. Is this related to how I'm working out? And then you put in your workout and you're like, oh yeah, like you're not stretching this calf muscle enough or something. It's just like this like combination of it's context really. It's just more context into someone's life. Like with our current medical system, they don't have enough time to they don't have enough time to learn about you at all. It's really just like what hurts. Okay, here's some medication or something versus like sitting down, truly understanding everyone's life and genetic information. Like my 23andMe data is being sold somewhere. Like that's okay with me. It's like hopefully
Yeah,
that winds up in some good hands.
it is nice. Like, especially as we start having wearables like the Aura Ring and the Apple Watch and all of these kind of technologies in the Whoop and all of these, it is only going to feed in. If you can start feeding that into your medical practitioner, right, and allow that and add that to your medical records, it adds a whole lot more insight and allow them to make a lot more intelligent decisions based off what they know. But yeah, what there was, you mentioned the mapping. There was a project where AI just mapped every single like amino acid and protein cells. I'll send you, it's, I think Vertasium, the YouTube guy, did a really nice overview of that, but it was something that we've been trying to solve for years. And someone turned it into a game where people were like doing it on their own time and helping this larger community. But you only got so far over 14 or so years. And then you have AI start playing the game. And all of a sudden, there's a huge medical advancement and research enhancements through this one AI bot who ended up mapping out all the proteins.
Yeah. I mean, now that you think about it, or now that I think about it after you saying that, it's kind of like the, I mean, this AI stage of our life is really like open source to the max. It's like open source historically has been like for developers that have a very high skill set and are able to contribute to a large code base. Now it's like we can all kind of contribute to this one unified thing, and it doesn't require a high barrier to entry. In fact, it's like the lowest barrier of entry. It's like so to use it is it's incredibly straightforward. Yeah, I just realized that.
It's exciting. It is. It's a little horrifying at some point, right? If you think about sci-fi, AI was always the big kind of ultimate scary, and now is it still that? Is it? We'll see.
It terrifies me. It really does. So in terms of like using AI at an enterprise when working with data, like what are like the big landmines that people should be avoiding, and how do you avoid them?
That's a great question. Messy data is the biggest one, and sometimes it's unavoidable, but bad in, bad out. If you're giving biased or incorrect or inaccurate information in the GPT, it's gonna result in bad outputs. And so really, really focusing on hardening your data and making sure it's accurate and accessible, and then making sure that your kind of data structure is set up where they can kind of communicate and relate and have all your keys and set up. That's kind of foundational of what you want to be using if you're using AI with your own data set. If you're not using your own data set, it kind of goes back to how do you trust it? And it's making sure that someone who has enough knowledge to QA or validate the responses are the ones who are putting in the prompts. Beyond that, it's really, really hard.
So you mentioned you mentioned bias, and what's interesting is like because you're using semantic language to prompt, right? And that inherently has biases, right? They different meanings. And before, like data science is more revolved around like hard coded like SQL queries. Like you wanted specific things from tables and things like that. And so do you feel that there are more biases now than the traditional like SQL queries?
That's a great question. There are probably more unknown, right? I think when you're writing SQL queries, you can look at them and call them out and say through your code, hey, you're making some assumptions. It's someone who's really good at writing surveys or kind of doing that analysis on those questions and trying to understand that. I think it's easier to actually read the code and say, is there bias and where is there bias and how do we adjust? I think if you're just typing it out and writing it and then getting a result, you're not seeing any of the back end. You don't know if there's any inherent bias there or not. I'm assuming there is, but in order to find it, it's going to be a lot more difficult.
Yeah, I guess there's always bias in data, and now that I think about it, it's like,
Yeah, it's the correlation versus causation thing, right? It's always going to be there unless you're able to somehow, right, get the factor where you have 95% confidence in it and to that know that's directly correlate or there's causation, great. But there's so much correlation with all the data that it's hard to not have bias.
yeah, especially with surveys. I mean, it's how do you account for like someone that's just like clicking through those things? You know, like I am that person. It's like if there's any type of survey where I don't really feel like the outcome or the ultimate reward for filling out that survey is going to be enough, I'm just randomly going through it, and maybe you can assess like time of completion or something like that. But
That's
I
a
don't
good
know. It's
question. Yeah. The other one was we're dealing with that as well. And it's randomizing the order, right? Of when it's least satisfied to most satisfied, it's tough to do that. But when you're asking questions and things like that, or just if it's a drop down of, hey, select, randomize the order made a huge difference because for years, the first option that dropped down was almost always the one that was chosen. I think you could look at that and make the assumption that this is the number reason. Let's assume it was a cancellation reason. This is the number one reason that someone's canceling. And then you actually adjust it and you put a different one at the top. That becomes the number one reason they're canceling. And it's because they want to cancel. They don't care that you want to know that we want to cancel. They just want to do it as quickly as possible. And so they're just taking the first one. And so putting it in random order kind of allows us to normalize for that a bit.
yeah. There's two strategies I have with the drop downs when canceling. The first one is I will just go to a random one and try to cancel as quickly as possible. I don't even know what I'm clicking. So that's one. The second one is like maybe I can hunt for a deal on that because they often will have discounts. If you say like it's just too much,
Mm-hmm.
um, you get a subscription discount or something like that. Like that has kept me around. So that's a pretty effective strategy. But also something that anyone could do.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I mean,
that's how do you guys combat something like that?
there's a really interesting need. We always talk about lifetime value, right? And you always want to target your focus and hyper focus on those ones that have the highest lifetime value and then try to get the others to take the actions to get them into that tier. You also have to do the reverse and look at your customers that are producing negative value over and over and over again. And at that point, right, with personalization, you can say, hey, for these users, we don't offer that anymore. And that would be a really nice way to just kind of solve for that. But there are plenty of companies, especially who are still in the funding or pre-profit and really just trying to grow their subscriber base. They're going to constantly do that, right? One of the food delivery companies, I just wait until I get 75% off a box and I'll order it from them. I'll use their food for a week. I will cancel it. And then it typically takes about 2 or 3 months. And then all of a sudden on Venmo or I buy a ticket through Ticketmaster or something else, I get another prompt that says 75% off. And I was like, at some point, that company should not be offering me that 75% off ever. Because if they look at my data, I'm buying one box at 75% off, I'm canceling, and I'm waiting 3 months and doing it again. The only time they've ever made a profit on me was when I forgot to cancel that first time.
Gosh.
And I mean, it is what it is when you're young in your 20s and trying. This was a while ago, but when you're trying to like get through a week without bouncing a paycheck, it certainly it helps. And there are a lot of people who are doing that, and it's going to get more and more savvy. And then you add in automation and AI bots, they're going to be able to do that all the time. That's now I might have to actually vibe code that one where it's
I was
okay if
just
I'm an
thinking, I
AI
was like,
bot where
this is exactly what we need to do is just make an AI bot that games all of the free trials in one's life.
yeah,
Like I remember as you know, when I was like 25, I was 25 and like Casper and those types of brands had just kind of come up and they were all offering like 3 months free of a mattress. And you could legitimately not pay for a mattress for like 18 months or something, as long as you were willing to deal with the returns. But yeah, that's a lot of friction for anyone. You basically couldn't have a significant other in that scenario. So
yeah, that's something that goes out the window pretty quickly.
yeah, yeah. Um, cool. Yeah. we're at about time. So yeah, this is great. Appreciate you coming on, Greg.
Yeah, no, thanks for the invite. I really enjoyed the conversation. It was fun. You mentioned a few things that I'm now gonna to go away and start thinking more about. So I appreciate that.
Of course. Thanks.
Awesome.
Talk soon.
You got it.